Well, if you have a Bible, you can turn to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1. 1 Samuel, chapter 1. And as we're turning there was an event that occurred a number of years ago, actually quite a few years ago now, when I was just a kid, but it'll tie into what we're speaking about today. You see, when my sister and I were little, of course, we grew up in our home and the family with my mom and dad, and this is going to sound really impossible or hard to believe, but every so often, Mom and Dad wanted to get away. They didn't always want to be with us. Imagine that. So every so often, we had the local babysitter come. And actually, we had a great babysitter growing up, when we were still living in Germany. And I don't know at what point it started, maybe when we were 6 years old or somewhere around there. But this babysitter was a really talented artist. I think she was maybe 17. And she would draw pictures with us nonstop. And it was great. And it was fun. But even when you've got a fun time, even when you have a good babysitter, it's just not the same as having Mom and Dad there. It's just not the same as when the whole family's together. So sometimes, if Mom and Dad would say, we're going to be gone tonight, they wouldn't usually announce it way long in advance. It would usually be that day. We're going to be gone this evening. But your babysitter's coming. There could almost be this feeling of, oh no, what's going to happen? Mom and Dad are going to be gone. But the key, as simple as it sounds, the key to overcoming was a promise. They said, don't worry, we won't be gone long. We're going to be coming back. And you might be saying, well, that's a pretty simple promise. But for a kid, that's a big deal. Because while Mom and Dad are gone, it can seem like forever. You're looking at the clock, you're wondering what's going to happen. But when you hold on to the promise, those things that feel stretching suddenly aren't so difficult anymore. And even though usually we probably forgot about Mom and Dad after a while because we were just having so much fun, drawing pictures and doing art and all those kinds of things, there's a principle that we're going to be looking at today. Now, we've been in a series on supernatural hope, okay? We've been in a series of hope. Nope, almost. We've been on the series of the supernatural. And tonight we're going to be looking at supernatural hope. Now, hope can come in a variety of ways. And we're going to be focusing on 3 of those ways tonight. And one of them, you already got the sneak peek on from the babysitter story. One of the ways that hope can come, and not just any hope, but a supernatural hope, a hope from God, one of those ways it can come is when God gives us a promise. So that just like children hearing, my parents are going to come back. Am I going to believe it? Am I not? If you believe it and you hold on to it, you can start to get filled with hope. You see, you start expecting something. You start anticipating something where you're saying, it might feel one way right now, but it's not going to stay this way. I have a promise. You can probably already see how this is tying in to what we need in life. You see, a promise from God can change a situation that looks totally bleak, that looks totally dark or against you or hopeless. And one promise can turn it all around. We've looked at the story in 1 Samuel before, but it's such a perfect illustration. I just couldn't resist. This is the story right before Samuel the prophet is born, okay? And his mother, Hannah, has no children. And we know the story. She's so loved by her husband, but there are two wives, which is always a problem in the scriptures. And the other wife is having children. Hannah is not having any children. The other wife is provoking her. Hannah's crying as they're going to offer up sacrifices to the Lord. It's a difficult, difficult time. But everything changes when she gets a promise. At this time, the priest Eli is overseeing what was then the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And Eli sees her, and she's praying to God, crying out to God, pouring out her soul to God, but Eli isn't hearing her. He's just seeing her lips move. So he's assuming she's had way too much to drink. She's drunk. And so he goes up and he rebukes her. And that's where we're going to start. Verse 14 of 1 Samuel chapter 1. So Eli said to her, "How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you." But Hannah answered and said, "No, my lord. I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now." Verse 17, these next two verses are going to be key for us. Then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him." Some of you might say, that's not a very great thing to hear. I mean, Eli, in some ways, wasn't even that godly. He didn't restrain his sons who were sinning. All these issues were going on. You might be saying, why should she even listen to Eli? But you see, even though Eli was a man and he had weaknesses and issues, Eli was also the high priest who was presiding over the tabernacle of the Lord. And even though he wasn't perfect, there was a positional authority that God had given him. Isn't that interesting? He had a positional authority as high priest within Israel. And here's the thing. When he prayed that God would answer Hannah's prayer, God moved in response to his prayer, even though he was a very imperfect person. It does bring the fear of the Lord a little bit, thinking, my goodness, God, are you that intent on honoring positions that you're willing to move through someone like that? But God was. Now look at verse 18. This is the key. Hannah hears what he just said, and this is her response. She said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. This word is for somebody tonight. Somebody here, and maybe it's the folks online, or maybe it's a little bit of all of us, but someone here needs to hear that. Where you're feeling like things are difficult, whatever the circumstances, whatever you're going through, it's not that you have to share it right now, but God knows the hearts. God knows exactly what we're going through. But whatever feels impossible, just like it felt impossible, unfair, totally undoable to Hannah, when God gave her a promise, she wasn't sad anymore. The sadness went away as hope came into her heart. There was a promise. I don't want us to underestimate the power of a promise from God. Sometimes people will use expressions like, oh, they're holding out on that possibility, or they're just hoping for something and it might never happen. And we can definitely put our hope in the wrong things. But when we have a promise from God, a genuine promise where God says, I'm going to do this for you, it can put something in us that lets us get past what we see. There's a fun example of this in the life of Rees Howells. It's a story many of you have heard many times now from this pulpit, but it's just fun. It's fun to share about a life of someone who lived for God and lived by faith. But one of the stories in that book, Rees Howells' Intercessor, that was so stunning to me is that as Rees Howells was a young man, he was learning some of the principles of intercession. He had an interesting encounter. There was a man from London who was a prominent person, a person of society, who was named Mr. Gossett. And Mr. Gossett invited Rees to come to London and mingle with high society. It seemed like Rees's doors were opening. Well, God used this opportunity, and Rees was able to minister and share some of the different things that God had taught him. But here's what was interesting. Mr. Gossett was such a good host to him that he came and said to Mr. Gossett, you've done all the things that the Shunammite woman did for Elisha. He said, you've treated me the same way. You've prepared a place for me. You've blessed me. He said, and just like Elisha said, what do you want? What can be done for you? Whatever you want, basically, God's going to give you. Rees Howells said the same thing to Mr. Gossett. He said, because you've blessed me as a man of God, whatever you want, God's going to give you. So ask, what do you want? And as soon as Mr. Gossett hears this, he's just breaking down in tears. And he shares his heart and says, well, my son left the army. He's in Africa right now. This was, in Great Britain in the old days. And he said he's not living the way he was raised. He's living a bad life. And I'm just so concerned that he's going to be bringing shame on the family. And he was concerned about his son. So Rees Howells said, okay, we're going to intercede together, and God is going to change his life. And this was a big stepping stone, because until then, Rees Howells had ministered to people, he had helped people, he'd prayed with them, but he never had a situation where someone was a continent away and he didn't have any communication with him, had never met him, would probably never meet him, and all he could do to access that man's situation was to go to God in prayer. No worldly influence, nothing. No possible way of manipulating this test situation. It was only through prayer and faith in God. And so for months, he's praying, pressing into God, spending hours on his knees, being stretched by God, until finally, I think it was after a span of something like 6 months, he has assurance, and God speaks to him and says, you've passed the test. This Captain Ralph Gossett, who was Mr. Gossett's son, he said, he's going to be saved. He's going to be saved. You've got the promise. And as soon as he got that promise, he rejoiced. And he started sending letters back and forth to London to Mr. Gossett saying, he's going to be saved. And they were rejoicing together. Nowadays, you would, call or send text messages. But back then, it was rejoicing via letters. But there was a promise from God. And even though they agreed together, it was actually October 29th, 1909, they agreed together for this. And then they got the promise from God after. The breakthrough didn't come for 12 years. For 12 years, the breakthrough didn't come. In fact, Mr. Gossett had already passed away. And then one of Mr. Gossett's associates wrote to Rees Howells and said, I know years ago you were praying for this son of Mr. Gossett, and I just want to let you know that he's moved to Canada. He became a farmer, but there was something that stirred up within him, and he went with his wife to some Christian meeting, and he gave his life to Jesus Christ. And his whole life turned around, and everything changed just the way God said it would. But they could rejoice even before they saw the outward sign, because God gave them a promise. What has God promised you? What has God spoken to you where you're holding on to something, and even if you haven't seen it come to pass yet, what are those things where you're saying, God, I'm holding on to this, and I'm going to have hope in what you've said, because I know that your word is true. In some cases, you might be thinking, I sure need a promise like that. Then ask God, pray about it, press in, say, God, is there a promise you can give me in my life situations? Is there something that I can hold on to in a deeper way that'll bring your hope into my life in this area? Press in for a promise from God. Don't come up with your own promises. I think God might be. No. Press in until he gives you a promise. It could be through the word. It could be something that he speaks to you. It could be a dream he gives you. There are a lot of different ways God can speak to us. But once you have that promise, even if it comes through another person, it gives a hope that you can hold on to. So that's one way that a supernatural hope comes. All right, let's look at another scriptural example, because there are more ways that hope comes. This one's found in the book of Judges. So turn with me to Judges chapter 7. Judges 7. Here we're kind of middle of the story of Gideon. And we know Gideon was this fearful man who God raised up and used in a mighty way to be a judge in Israel and to deliver the whole nation. But there was a lot of fear that Gideon had to overcome. And there were a lot of steps. And if you're ever in a season where you think, I need to overcome fear, study the life of Gideon. There are so many principles of overcoming fear in that story. So starting in Judges 6 and then going all the way forward through about Judges 8, you just find principle after principle, test after test, where Gideon's afraid and hiding, and then God encourages him. He overcomes, and he has victory. So this is one of those tests, okay? And by the way, in the natural, we can see why Gideon might be a little scared. God just reduced his army down to 300 guys. The enemy has over 100,000 troops. You might be a little nervous too. But Gideon has something else. He needs hope from God. So how does he get there? How does he get to that place of hope? Let's start in verse 9. Gideon is concerned. He's got this little ragtag group. How are they going to take on the army? It happened, verse 9, on the same night that the Lord said to him, "Arise and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand." Now we might say that's a promise. It is. Gideon needed a little something extra. "But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Okay, so he's following instructions. He's obeying the Lord. So far, so good. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in multitude. Now you might not feel especially brave, right? When you're going down with one other guy and then you can't even number the enemy. There's so many. Not encouraging so far. Let's see what God's going to do. And then Gideon, when he had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. And he said, I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it, so it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. That's pretty astounding. I mean, imagine if you were just going down, these enemy soldiers have never met you in their lives, and you're kind of sneaking over there, and you're listening. You hear this dream, and then one random guy says to another guy, oh yeah, that random barley loaf that you saw tumbling down the mountain, that's Sean Medine. He's from Northfield, and God's going to give this whole army into his hand. You'd probably say, ha-ha, this is a moment of victory. All of a sudden, this random guy you've never met is testifying to what God is doing. Unbeliever. These guys were the enemies of the Lord. And they're literally telling Gideon what God has already told him. They're testifying to something. He may not have known that he was giving a testimony, but he was testifying to the dream and its interpretation, and that was enough for Gideon to prevail. All of a sudden, Gideon's walking about 10 feet tall, goes up to his men and says, all right, guys, God's got it. What happened? He went from being afraid and sneaking along with his servant to suddenly he can take on a whole army. And he does, and they win. That should tell you something about how much hope can come out of one testimony. Pretty remarkable. We were just talking a moment ago about Reese Howells and how, he followed God through difficult things. But one challenge that Reese faced when he was a young man is God stretched him in some unusual ways. Maybe some of you feel like God's stretching you in unusual ways, and you're thinking, God, why me? I feel like I go through all these things, and it seems like the people next door, God takes care of all their needs, everything's going great, la-di-da. Why don't the Johnsons go through what I'm going through? How is this fair? But maybe God's doing something in you that's developing a testimony so that you can testify to what He's done, and it'll start bringing hope to other people. You see, often when we are encountering things, our first thought is, oh, it's hard, it's unfair, God, this is difficult. And then later we might think, well, God, hopefully you can get me through this. But how often do we think in terms of, God, is what I'm going through right now, in the long run, actually designed to help someone else? Could it be that you're developing a testimony, that you're teaching me something? So when Reese Howells, as a young man, was so stretched, and God was asking him to do things that none of the neighbors were doing, and spending hours and hours in prayer, and working hard, and then praying some more, and doing ministry, and ministering to all these unappealing people. They called them the tramps, the homeless, the drunkards. And Reese would go out at night and share Jesus with them, and people didn't understand what he was doing and why God was leading him that way. And finally, it came to a little bit of a head-to-head in his family setting, where his mother and father were thinking, maybe he's gone off the deep end. What are we going to do with this young man? And his father said, Reese, who has God ever asked to do the things that you're doing? Name one person outside of the Bible. And Reese said, George Mueller. You see, George Mueller was another man that was led by faith who had lived a little ways before Rees Howells and was already dead at that point. It sounds funny, but even knowing that one other person had been led in that way of faith, Rees knew he wasn't going crazy. He knew it was God, and he knew God had a purpose, and he saw it in someone else. And that allowed him to have hope for what God was doing in his life. During COVID, during that era, some people had the idea that now that we can do online church streaming, no one needs to come to church anymore. I can just worship God from my living room. I can have my feet up. I don't even have to get out of my pajamas on a Sunday. Why do we even need to come to church? It's pretty simple, actually. If you never come to church, who's ever going to hear your testimony? How are you going to minister the things of God to others if you're not there? How are you going to do what God's called you to do for other people? You see, receiving is important when we come to a group like this or any church gathering, but giving is so important too. And we know Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. How do you know if something that sounds so simple to you, maybe it was just a little thing that God did for you this week, or maybe it was a little something that you overcame that was difficult and, you were struggling with it a little bit and then God helped you and somehow you got through it. How do you know if that isn't the key to breakthrough for the person next to you? You might have been given a key that will unlock the door that the person across the room needs open. The thing that they're struggling with, once they hear your testimony, they'll say, "Oh, now I have hope. Now I know that I'm not the only person dealing with X, Y, and Z, but also someone else got victory in it. I can too." There's power when we testify. There's power in our testimonies, and it brings a supernatural hope that can raise up other people. Now, I understand that not every single thing that we go through with God is always to be shared. Sometimes we can go through something, it can be a personal thing. I understand that. But sometimes I think we're robbing God of an opportunity to bless someone else if we just keep our breakthroughs private. If God has really done something to touch your life, share it with someone else. It'll encourage them. Now, after you've shared the 45th testimony that night, and they say, thank you, and they're slowly backing up, then maybe okay, I've shared enough. But in general, I think we undershare rather than overshare our testimonies. Okay, we'll look at a third avenue for hope. And by the way, these aren't the only three ways that you can get supernatural hope scripturally, but these are three key ways I think that will be good takeaways for us. So for this last one, let's turn to the Gospel of Mark, the 6th chapter. Mark chapter 6. Is this making sense so far? Okay. So we've seen how hope can come through a promise. We've seen how hope can come through a testimony. But there's another prominent way that you see hope coming to people. And you see this especially in the Gospels. Hope can come to someone through a God encounter. Let's look at Mark chapter 6. So here we have Jesus hanging out with his disciples. The disciples are testifying, right? That's what we just looked at. They're testifying to all the good things God has done. and they're ready to withdraw and have some time alone. And then something unexpected happens. Let's go to verse 30. The apostles gathered to Jesus, told him all these things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while." Even Jesus believed in rest. It's a good thing. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed, verse 32, to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. Now here's the amazing thing, verse 33. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. And they arrived before them and came together to him. Just think about this for a moment. We know this is where 5,000 people are going to be fed, okay? We know amazing miracles are about to happen, and so sometimes we just focus on that miracle, but we can miss an important step. Did you notice that 5,000 people are running out into the desert? Doesn't that seem a little odd? Doesn't that seem a little strange? Why? And that doesn't even count women and children. I mean, this is a huge crowd. 5,000 people are running out into the desert. When was the last time you ran out into the desert? 5,000 people are running out. For what? They're running into the desert to have a God encounter. They're running out into the desert to see Jesus. And later on, we find out they have no food, so they clearly weren't prepared. They didn't go through Boy Scouts. They didn't know to be ready. They just ran, left everything behind, because all they wanted was Jesus. And Jesus ends up feeding them too. He ends up taking care of their natural needs. But what kind of hope is going on in people if they're willing to drop everything? They hear, that Jesus guy, he's over there. And the multitudes run out so fast that they beat the ship. They outrun the ship. They're running along the shore to get to the spot where Jesus is going to hang out with the disciples. You see, Jesus had already been performing miracles. He had already been teaching. He had been doing things that touched this crowd so much that they were willing to drop everything and go for him. When you've had an encounter with God, you can't help but change. When God really encounters you, you're never the same again. And God encounters look so different. It looks different from one person to another, and even within the same person, there can be all kinds of different encounters that you have with God. Sometimes he opens something up where you go, "Oh, God, I never saw this before, and you're teaching me something, and I understand it now like I've never understood it." Sometimes he'll speak to you, and you'll think, "Oh, God, I hear your voice. Lord, thank you." Sometimes you're facing impossible circumstances and you feel totally stuck, and God comes through and you go, "God, there was no way that should have happened. God, I see your hand all over this." But whatever the God encounter, it brings a hope that transforms a person. Everybody in this room has had some kind of God encounter. But if you're looking for a fresh dose of hope, it might be time for a new God encounter, an additional one. You see, he never gets tired of encountering his people. It never gets old. It never gets boring to him. He loves us so much. He wants to be with us. A God encounter puts a hope in you like nothing else. Derek Prince is a Bible teacher that I enjoy, and he shared a story that stuck with me through many years. Some of you may have heard this one before. But while he was in the military serving, he was stationed in the Sudan in World War II. And there was a Muslim man that he was working with, and he was trying to share the gospel with him. And at first it wasn't really working out, but eventually he gained his trust. And so he was sharing with this Muslim man about Jesus, and that he wasn't just a prophet, but that Jesus was the Son of God. And this Muslim man was seeing a transformation in Derek's life, and eventually he said, how do I get this Jesus? And so Derek Prince said, here's what we're going to do. Both of us are going to pray for you around this time on this day, and then the next day we'll get together and we'll talk about it. So this man went into his hut. Derek Prince went into his military barracks. They prayed. They came back, and the guy said, I'm not changed. He said, well, how did you pray? He said, well, I prayed that, God would encounter me in the name of Allah. And Derek said, okay. We're going to do it again tonight. This night, we're both going to pray that God encounter you in the name of Jesus. Okay. So they both went their separate ways. And the next day, they came together. And I love when Derek shares the story because he said, I didn't have to ask him whether he got it or not. He said, I could see it on his face. He was so lit up. He was so full of joy. I knew he had found Jesus Christ. I knew he was transformed. That man had a God encounter, and he was radically changed by Jesus Christ. You can get a new hope in your life by a fresh encounter with the living God. To sum up some of our points, a promise from God brings hope. A testimony brings hope. A God encounter brings hope. And this is not the way the world gives hope. This is hope of a supernatural kind, hope that only comes through God. But those are three ways where God imparts it very practically to us. And a place that we can encounter God very practically is in His Word. Now, I understand that the Word and God, we're not worshiping the Bible per se, but we also know that these are the words of God, and what He has spoken to us, it's so important to meditate on. If you're ever feeling like you need more hope, I encourage you, read through the end of the book of Revelation. I'm serious. There are few places in the Word that encourage me in the same way as the last 3 chapters. If I read Revelation 20, 21, and 22, I walk away encouraged. All of a sudden, the things I'm going through, the trials of today, the trials of this week, the things of this year, whatever it might be, when you hold it up against eternity, it totally loses its power. Isn't that something? When you hear and read what God promises to you, all of a sudden you go, wow. God, you say you're going to wipe every tear away. God, unlike right now, where you're in heaven and we're here, you're living in us, and you've given us the Holy Spirit as a down payment. But on that day, it says the New Jerusalem is going to come down, and God's dwelling place is going to be with man. Isn't that something? God is going to be with you. He's going to wipe every tear from your eye. Everything that seems difficult now, God already has a solution for. And He's already preparing you for that time ahead. You know, our lives are so momentary. It's such a short time, the human lifespan on this side. What I mean is this side of eternity. But humans live forever. And when we know Jesus Christ and have received him as our Savior and have given our lives to him, he promises to prepare a place for us where we get to live with him forever. And we're not going to have to live in the difficulties that we face now at that point. So if you're thinking tonight, God, I need some new hope. God, I need a fresh touch from you. Be thinking, Lord, what kind of an encounter do you have in store for me? Lord, what kind of a testimony are you developing in me tonight? Lord, what kind of a promise or promises do you have for me? Because if you're going into this with expectation and knowing that God's going to do things, you're going to find he's faithful to fulfill all those things and more in your life. Let's pray. And worship team, you can come up.